Thank you, Professor Finley, for organizing all this. I must say I've been very impressed by his decades of commitment to academic freedom and for bringing crucial subject matters into campus. Here we are to discuss national security and civil rights, but through the perspective of the university as being an important location to discuss these matters. And moreover, through the viewpoints of academic activists trying to challenge silencing, evasion, and so forth. Though I confess I'm not an academic, I'm a high school teacher, a lesser mortal. But going back to the very idea of why the university as a place to discuss things like national security and civil liberties. I think it's a pretty good idea to draw wisdom from University of Toronto's Governing Council in their Statement of Institutional Purpose. It reads as follows: within the unique university context, the most crucial of all human rights are the rights of freedom of speech, academic freedom, and freedom of research, and we affirm that these rights are meaningless unless they entail the right to raise deeply disturbing questions and provocative challenges to the cherished beliefs of society at large and the university itself. This is one of the purposes of what the university is for. In this spirit, I would like to apply this principle of raising provocative challenges to established beliefs. And with regards to Bill C-51, I would like to call into question an unexplored assumption, of which is that the state is the provider of security. And of course, I don't mean the entire state. I want to look at certain irresponsible elements within the state that are sometimes beyond the standard radius of scrutiny.
I know. Hey! Brother, take your mask off. No. Put the rock down, man. Put the rock down. Hey. Put the rock down. This is our line. Hey.
When it comes to a lot of the mainstream discourse across the nation about Bill C-51, I feel that there can be some mistakes, I think, in the long run, based on how we are participating in the discourse. Standard discourse has it that as these events unfold that destabilize the nation, we obviously are in need of greater security, a greater number of video cameras, police officers, and so forth. And naturally, you have privacy and so forth that is compromised and goes down. And you have this inverse correlation, and it's within this, it's presumed that it's a well-intentioned debate. And we're trying to locate the optimal point, kind of like a supply and demand graph in economics, that satisfies both the national security people and those on the civil liberties front. I appreciate the words of the former prime ministers who've spoken out, very diplomatically though, and they said in their article that we need to be very careful with this bill that's being rushed by the Harper government. They raised points like there needs to be stronger oversight. There needs to be a greater amount of cross-agency reviews. Or when you take a look at Mayor Arar's inquiry, Justice Dennis O'Connor's recommendations still have not been implemented. So they raise a number of points, but they're essentially still within that framework of discussion. So I think eventually in the long run, this type of framework can be hazardous because it does not call into question some unexplored assumptions. I would like to take a look at some interesting historical items and also the current regime's actions. Tommy Douglas, you know, as a person who was voted to be Canada's greatest Canadian.
Tommy Douglas is the father of Canadian Medicare. A simple idea, but a revolutionary one. Douglas campaigned for it. He fought for it. He had a fighting spirit, a dedication to social equality. Those were the hallmarks of his career.
Was under intense surveillance for over 30 years. Can I ask, just a show of hands, how many of you have seen the CBC documentary called Enemies of the State? Anyone remember that? 1, 2, 3, okay. Yeah, it was an extraordinary film. And, you know, he was loved, and a lot of parties supported him. And of course, when you're very prominent, there's all types of parties, like the peace movement and communist parties and so forth. And just because of those indirect links and associations, he was under intense surveillance. And the CBC tried to ask the RCMP to show all of his files, and they responded that the vast majority of Tommy Douglas's files will remain classified indefinitely. And so the CBC looked at other documents, and they found his name actually listed on an apprehension order paper. It was stated indirectly, but they believe that with high probability he was also to be apprehended, which is quite extraordinary that you have certain groups within, irresponsible groups within the government that are working to provide the opposite of security or insecurity against other members of government. You know, and so the Operation Profunk, which focused on prominent functionaries and communist sympathizers and so forth in the 50s and 60s, the aim was to round up on any day of emergency. Again, like C-51, emergency back then wasn't properly defined. It's classified and we're not entitled to really know about the details. They would round up 15,000 suspected communists and another 60,000 communist sympathizers. So if your father was a communist and you were only 5 years old, you had no idea about it. As a kid, you would also be rounded up in the process. At least in Toronto, near where I live, Castle Loma, which is a beautiful tourist site and weddings take place there and so forth, was the location actually for taking a lot of men, women, and children there. And if you tried to run away, they would shoot you, according to the declassified documents, and for points of view that were entirely legal. So I'm calling into question this idea historically that the state, this unexplored idea that the state is a provider of security. More recently, of course, I think that would be of interest to people. I don't think I have time to go to very recent events, but at least the Toronto 18 is something that's worth looking into, because it's often cited in many academic papers. Academics get thousands of dollars, and even some I know at the University of Waterloo, by basically citing in their research in why they should be, and how academics cooperate with thesis and so forth in trying to strengthen tracking methods, monitoring methods through social media and so forth. And to get that type of funding, they pretty much just cite, well, Toronto 18 happened and there's homegrown terrorism and this and that. And so I think there's a whole research industry that's founded, and yet some key things have not been called into question on what this research actually relies on. Toronto 18, when you actually take a look at Mubin Sheikh, who was the key informant, the one informant who was gathering all these young Muslim men in Toronto, he has contradicted himself numerous times and has even said that many of the suspects are innocent and unaware of any sinister plot. In response to the Fifth Estate's question on when he learned of the bomb plot, remember all the big information, all the key information is coming from one informant, Mubin Sheikh. He says he found out about the bomb plot when the RCMP announced it, when they were arresting the Toronto 18. And yet later on in other interviews, he's like, oh yeah, they had the bomb plot all along. So there's massive contradictions on the very points that serve as highlights in newspaper articles. Quote, I didn't know what these guys were up to, nothing of the sort. And then interestingly, just days before the final hearings, Sheikh requested an additional $2.4 million from the RCMP. Quote, in promised to aggressively defend the evidence and vocally support the role of the agencies involved, McLean's 2008. And the other informant, El Sohami, who has the agricultural engineering license to purchase all of that ammonium nitrate, was given $4 million for that little task. Now, that's a lot of money. A lot of money. And it's very interesting how it reflects a lot of the research going on in the United States. When you look at the research of Trevor Aronson, who is an award-winning investigative journalist, and with the University of California, Berkeley, their investigative journalism program was involved in examining the prosecutions of over 500 defendants related to terrorism cases. And they looked at so many of them, and they couldn't help but notice that so many of these cases, the informants suggested the plot. The informants actually provided the means for the plot. And when you actually remove a lot of these variables and you ask yourself, how many of these were real terrorists? Trevor Arison's conclusion is about 1%. Okay. So I feel that there is a major need to call into question how, when big money interests are here, how it provides an incentive for informants to exaggerate or at times to even make up a story to which they know that their bosses would be very much favorable towards. The more cases they are able to, the more so-called terrorist plots that they report, the more funding comes in. So I feel that in the long run, we need to kind of not only have our foot in the standard mainstream discourse, but we also need to legitimize some unexplored assumptions. Otherwise, we might be in for difficulties in the long run. Okay, thank you.